Welcome to Spectrum Sundays. I am Francesca D'Alessandro, a current master's student at University of Buffalo studying speech-language pathology. Additionally, I am your Miss Thousand Islands of New York State, serving my community through AAA Appreciation and Awareness for Autism.
And I am Megan Sinisi, a Master of Health Science candidate studying to practice as a pediatric speech-language pathologist. I am also Miss Central Pennsylvania and the founder of a nonprofit organization for autism titled From a New Perspective.
Everyone deserves to feel accepted and included in every space they walk in. Our series aims to inspire you to advocate for yourself and on behalf of your loved ones. And we are so grateful that you're here with us today.
Rochelle Gardner is an aspiring author and a self-advocate for autism appreciation. She is a graduate of Altoona Area High School and hopes to one day become a motivational speaker. Throughout her lifetime, Rochelle has battled with the challenges of depression, mental health, and physical health. Now, she works to connect with others and share her story, including her experiences with autism, in hopes to encourage others to rise above their struggles and to confidently embrace their identity. She has published several poems on the topic of mental health and is writing her way into the future, one poem at a time. So thank you, Rochelle, for being with us today. We're so excited to get to know you. To get started,
Great to be here.
Awesome. Well, to get started, tell us a little bit about yourself. What are some things that you enjoy doing, or what are some activities that you're involved in?
I am actually currently part of a very small publishing group, and within them, I've been doing a lot of graphic arts, practicing with that, and I've actually found that I love editing photos and being able to just kind of put my own spin on photos, and that comes probably from growing up reading like Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings and watching a bunch of movies growing up. I've always loved watching movies, so that's one of my biggest hobbies.
That's so cool. So a little bit of graphic design is maybe in your future too. And you and I actually talked privately about your illustrations that you shared with me. And you mentioned about maybe even doing some illustrations for a children's book one day, which would be so cool.
I'd love to actually do that someday. That's actually on one of my bucket lists of something to do in the future, especially because like my siblings both have kids that are very young, and I'd love to be able to make children's book for them.
Yeah, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, and Megan and I are both speech language pathologists, so we use books like almost all of the time when we're teaching our little ones, and picture books are some of the best types of books to use because we can use them so open-endedly and ask all types of questions, and usually the kids love really creative photos. So if you ever make any, definitely send them our way because we will get a lot of use out of them.
Definitely. Kids can learn so much from pictures, and they often have different takes on them from each one. They can learn so much just from a single picture. And often they'll get images from the pictures that we don't even pick up from.
Right, exactly. And, that's why we love what we do, especially on Spectrum Sundays, because we get to talk about all of the different perspectives that we see all the time. And I mean, right now you're talking about children, but even so within the autism communities, there's so many different perspectives that we just love to highlight and amplify. And before we really start our conversation today, I wanted to just get to know you a little bit more and ask if you have a preference for how you like to be addressed. So sometimes we refer to someone as person with autism, which is person first language, or autistic person, which is identity first language. Do you have a preference of one over the other? And if so, could you tell us why?
I don't really have a preference over either. A lot of times I grew up actually considering myself what's called an Aspie, because before it was considered under the autism spectrum, it was Asperger's. I was always actually tormented for the word Asperger's because it's very different from what everybody always considers autism. And it's a very strange word. but a lot of those that were considered Asperger's were called Aspies. And so growing up, because I didn't like being considered autistic and I hated the tormenting I got for it, I would consider myself an Aspie over top of all of it to try to distance myself from the word autism.
Yeah, that's one, unfortunate to hear that you had that experience. And that's another reason that we like to share stories like yours, because mindsets and perspectives are shifting dramatically, especially in the past few years, because so much emphasis is being put on people who are actually autistic or actually have had these experiences. So stories like yours, when you can come forward and say, this is how I was treated because of a diagnosis, just because I needed a little bit of extra support, you know, you can share that story and hopefully inspire others to change their approach to how they treat people and to just be more kind individuals. So you mentioned a little bit about how your diagnosis affected you throughout your childhood and through high school, but what was that process like at first? When did you receive your diagnosis? How old were you? What were some of the questions that you had from that whole thing?
Thankfully, because my brother was 9 years older than me, when he got diagnosed, I was probably 4 or 5 years old. So we actually got to find out very, very young with me. But because I was so young, it also made it very difficult in school still, because teachers and that would still judge me because I was still considered different from the other kids. There were still so many kids that would see that difference in me from them, and they basically use it, maybe not like a physical weapon, but it'd be like a verbal weapon against me, a mental weapon, and it would be very hard to go up against when I didn't understand at that age that it was being used against me. And I think that's why I'm thankful to a girl who, though we didn't get along all the time, if she knew someone was using this stuff against me, she would come to me and tell me. And was very upfront and honest with me about, hey, by the way, they're not actually being serious, they're using you. And I think that's one of the reasons I got through elementary so easily, was because she was thankfully honest enough with me to tell me when something was being used against me.
Well, first of all, thank you for sharing that story, because Megan and I were just talking about how some people I know who have autism struggled with the same exact problem, with not understanding when something crossed the line. And sometimes it takes another person to see that. And luckily, you had someone to do that, even though you said that maybe you guys didn't get along the best, but you had someone who was still looking out for your well being. And it helped you to realize and become self-aware for those things and advocate for yourself later on in life. And also too, in the class, unfortunately that happened while you were at school in the classroom. And I feel like there still could be so much more work done in our schools to help people with autism, wherever they are within the spectrum, to feel safe, to feel accommodated, and to be the most successful that they can be. And with your story, I really believe we can achieve that.
Very much so. A lot of kids hide it and everything anymore because they don't know how to express it, especially the teachers, because even teachers, they're not properly trained in how to handle those with autism unless they're in the special needs department. And therefore, those who are on the higher spectrum, who can be in regular classes, they don't know how to handle them. And we end up suppressing that side of us and pretending to be something we're not, where later on that affects us so negatively. And it makes it so much harder to blend into society.
Right. And that's the total opposite of what we want. And us as advocates, we want people to embrace their identity and celebrate the things that make them different, because those things are beautiful and they shouldn't be suppressed. So, in sharing your story, hopefully someone listening right now feels as inspired as we do to go forward and to forge a new path for, especially within schools, educators who can receive extra training and can be better
Yeah.
equipped to work with children that need the supports.
Very much so. It's entirely important for kids to be able to come out. I know just even now, I struggle to go out in the community because I still have that leftover trauma from being in school, from having the trouble with teachers and being able to talk with people because of all that I went through. But overcoming it, I'm thankful that I found people that are there for me. But
Right.
even that, it's been a 6-year struggle to even find that.
And once you find that, you just never want to let go, because that quality
Never.
friendship is worthwhile of waiting for. And actually, on this topic, we wanted to know, what were some of the qualities that you deem are important in a friendship? What are those things that you're looking for where you know it's going to be a connection for a lifetime?
A big one is loyalty and honesty. You can't have a friendship where there isn't loyalty and honesty, because that's one of the things that was drilled into me whenever I was very young. Honesty is the best policy, and if they're honest with you, they're going to stay loyal, because if they're neither of those, or even not just one of those, then the friendship can't last the way you would like it to, because they can't help you in the way you need. And if they're not there for you, you really can't be there in the same way for them either. I've had a friendship where, though I was upfront and honest and loyal, there were points where the other person was not entirely honest with me, and therefore, though we were loyal to each other, it actually tore us apart in huge ways. And now we're struggling to even see if we can have a friendship ever. And it's really actually torn at us both. And we were discussing it yesterday, how we want to be friends, but at the same point, we're like, is it even possible now because of everything that's happened?
Yeah.
And that's one of the biggest things, even in a relationship. Honesty and loyalty are so huge.
Absolutely. Those are very important to hold with any relationship, whether that's an intimate relationship or a friend, just a friend that you talk to from day to day. But something to leave you with a little bit of encouragement is, I try to think of friends and people, they can be here for a season or for a reason. So no matter who's come into your life, there is a reason that they came, there's a reason that they may go, and there's friends out there waiting for you to meet them too. So that's something to look forward to. And as we discuss the topic of having friendships, what is something that you hope others would understand about autism, and how, if someone meets a person with autism, how they can be a good friend to them outside of loyalty and honesty? What are things that you want them to understand about autism?
One of the big things is, a lot of people don't realize that when I've memorized something, or that was actually a huge thing in high school, was I have a tendency to memorize things. When I want to be friends with someone or any of that, I'll accidentally memorize something without meaning to, and it'll stick with me. And it often puts a barrier up between me and that person on becoming friends, or even just being a friend, because they think either I'm stalking them or I'm just being weird. And it has nothing to do with that. Those with autism, especially high forms like mine, we can memorize things easily. And it puts a huge barrier because they automatically think, oh, you're stalking me. But it's nothing like that. It's just, I have a very high form of being able to memorize things, same as my brother. And it can come in handy, like in classes, I was able to memorize my stuff so easily for tests and all that. I didn't have to study as hard as a lot of people for my tests, but when it came to friendships, it made it so difficult to be able to keep and maintain friendships, because I memorized things easily, but it put that barrier in between me and my friends. And I'd say stuff thinking, oh, this is the right thing to say, but because of the barriers, it would put a rift in between me and my friends, and sometimes even cause me to lose friends without understanding why I'm losing them, because I'm just really being myself.
That's a really interesting way of looking at how that memorization piece can affect your communication and cause miscommunication. Like you said, sometimes people can take it the wrong way and think that you're just memorizing every detail about their life when it's just because you're naturally a really great memorizer. And you actually talked about how that has positively impacted your academic life as well. And we talked a lot about some of the barriers that can come with autism. Do you feel like there are ways that autism has positively impacted your life?
Definitely. Honestly, I've had people question I've written one, pretty much a full book. It's basically a novella. Um, I'm working on the second to it, but a lot of my friends who are also writers looked at me whenever I said, I feel like I should probably write out the character bios now and everything. They looked at me and were like, wait, you didn't do that for your first book? I'm like, no, why should I have? They're like, yeah. And I'm just like, oh, I just kept all the information in my head. Like, all my information was in my mind about them. And they're like, what are you talking about? How do you keep that straight? You have like 50 different characters. Oh, sorry. It came in handy because I memorized all the information I needed in my mind, and it was there, like all the information on the place I was talking about and everything, all that world, all of it's in my mind. I didn't have to write it down, whereas other writers, they have to write it out. Especially, like, a good example is one of my idols, J.K. Rowling. She had to write down all that information, whereas the stuff I read about Harry Potter, it just stays in my mind. I memorize it, and it's just so easy for me to memorize. But whereas other people, they have to write it down to remember it, and it's just so ironic because not everybody can do that, and it surprises those around me, but it adds to my ability of holding that knowledge
Yeah,
and using that knowledge later on.
definitely. I love how earlier we talked about a little bit deeper of what autism was for you as a kid and how that maybe wasn't the greatest experience for you. But the second we asked you about the positive things, you lit up and you were able to really share about why autism makes you who you are and why that's nothing to be ashamed of. That's actually an asset to you. And it's something that other people wish that they could be more like. So that's a very motivational and inspiration message to share. And you also told us that you would like to be a motivational speaker someday. So I can see exactly where you fit right into that aspiration. But tell us about your journey of personal growth and acceptance of yourself and empowerment that you've felt over the years and how you can use that to inspire others.
Originally with it, I actually wanted to give up in school. I struggled a lot. And I think one of my biggest moments of personal growth with it honestly came my senior year. I was really low, and I really hit basically a rock bottom part. And um the band director at the high school pulled me aside. He had heard me say I wanted to quit flute, which was really like my last straw. And he was like, do you really want to quit? Because he made a good point. Like, if I want to quit, then quit, because otherwise I'm wasting his time and my own. And in that moment, I didn't really hesitate too much in saying I don't want to quit. And after that, I've worked so hard to keep with everything I do, including at hard times. There's been moments where I've wanted to give up again, and I've remembered those words. I've had moments where I've almost died. Like, I had a medication point where I actually got really sick, and by accident taking the medication, I accidentally overdosed by accident. And went into a comatic state. And I actually remember seeing, or hearing Dumbledore's one line from Harry Potter saying that it's King's Cross, you say, well, I suppose if you wanted, you could board a train and go off somewhere. But I remembered Harry going back to his friends, and I came back. And then the year after that, Chester Bennington died from Lincoln Park. And I was at a real low at that time as well. And I started writing a poem called My Pain. And the whole beginning of it was basically just me giving up and my whole struggle with depression. And then when I meant to end it, I kept writing basically me seeing how me ending everything would affect everybody around me, including those I didn't know. And then I had it where I woke up from like a dream, as if that all was just a dream I had, a nightmare. And how I wanted to spread that to the world and spread that that really isn't the answer. And it really isn't. Giving up is not the answer to any of it. Keeping through, pushing through is so much more empowering. It gives so much more strength to those around you. And I've seen it so many times. In high school, I didn't know until about 2-3 years ago, a friend pulled me aside online and told me that when I was in junior year, a senior had attached themselves to me to try and get people to stop tormenting me. And the one day I just went up to him and said hi and asked how his day was and gave him a smile and a hug and went about my day, never knowing I actually stopped him from committing suicide that night. And that night when he told me that, I sat there for about 2 hours after getting off the phone, and I was just like, I never would have known that I changed his life that night.
That is so touching, and it actually made me tear up a little bit. I don't know how you're feeling, Megan.
I am too.
Yeah, first of all, really, I appreciate your vulnerability to speak on things that are still, I would consider, taboo to talk about, especially in our current society. But there are stories that are so important to share because, like you said, you never know when you are going to impact someone's life just by the littlest gestures. And even just with your personal experiences and stories, all I can say is you are so strong for persevering. But also, I think there's always this misconception that to be successful, you never experience those hard times. But really, for me personally, I think success is being able to feel those really difficult feelings and still making those hard choices to pursue your goals or to keep going, even if it's just a small step. And you can't really compare yourself to anyone else's journey but your own. And just hearing your story is so inspiring. And I really can't wait till we get to share this message with all of our viewers, because I have a feeling there's going to be at least someone who can relate and hopefully better and improve their lives just by listening to what you've spoken about.
It's been a huge journey, and it really, I think one of the biggest lessons I learned growing up was that there's always a choice that you have to make. No matter what you do, everything's a choice. And your choice always depends. It always decides your consequence, whether good or bad, the consequence. And I think Dumbledore really summed that up nicely for me growing up, was that we always have the choice between what is right and what is easy. And yeah, though that's an easy choice to give up, the right choice may be harder, but it leads to so many more good things and so much more happiness and everything in the end. It makes me so much happier continuing, because I wrote my book with some of my own struggles in it, and watching those friends of mine read it, and my little stepsister that I have now read it, and her getting so excited, pestering me to know what's going to happen next and everything, it makes me so much happier than if I just gave up.
Yeah, and I would love to point out that a common misconception that we hear from our guests who either have autism or have a child with autism, They say that they would love to change the misconception that people with autism have no empathy or have no care for others. And that is just simply not true. And you really demonstrate it in how caring and kind you are in everything that you've done up to this point and that you aspire to do for others. So I commend you for that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And also,
It's a huge misconception.
Mhm.
right. And also, while you were speaking, you talked about how we always have a choice, right? We can always choose to do the easy thing or the hard thing. And I think in that in itself can help empower us because we know we have the choice to do better. And it's a great feeling to know that you're in control in some way over your own actions and your own thoughts. But before,
Yeah.
yeah, and I would like to kind of shift gears and talk about how we build our community and create better allies with the autism community. How do you think people can be more welcoming and accepting for those with autism?
Honestly, I feel like it literally starts with kids because kids hold a lot of influence in our society. People don't realize in the beginning, kids see other kids. They don't always look to parents. They see what other kids are doing and they react the same way as those kids. And adults react to the kids. So if adults and kids react the same way, they both need teaching at the same time. So I don't think it's geared towards just adults, nor is it geared towards just kids that need to know how to handle being around other autistics. Like, both sides should learn and not just, I don't like using the word shit all the time, but I wish more people knew that they aren't just people who are different. They're just people that have something that makes them stand out a little bit more. We're all different. If we were all the same, this world would be so boring. My parents always told me that growing up because I would get so upset about being normal. And my parents would always say normal is just a option on the washing machine. And I'd be like, you're just lying. And as I've grown up, I've come to find that's actually true. None of us are technically normal. We're all each different, but some of us are just a little more special than others. And I think it's huge if more people understood that just because someone has something that defines them a little bit more, it doesn't make them a freak or, I hate the R word, but a retard. It doesn't mean that they're anything less than that person. It just means they're a little bit more special. And I feel like that should be taught more in schools and how people are taught for their workplace, because that is where it all begins, is where we're taught.
Mhm. Definitely. And I agree with you that we have to reach as many children as possible when they're still in their formative years to help build their kindness and compassion for others. And I think that in my experience, adults that I've talked to, eventually they come to that point where they look back and they say, I wish I wouldn't have been so condescending to this person, or I wish I would have reacted a little bit different with more kindness. But it shouldn't take 25, 26 years for a person to come to that realization. So I agree with you. If it starts in the home and we can try to help shape a more kind and welcoming and accepting society, then imagine how much growth we will have in our world. And then also how much heartache that we'll spare in the process, because then
Mm-hmm.
bullying won't happen as much and people will feel more empowered to just be themselves and use their strengths to their full capacity without suppressing anything. So I think that's really
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah. Because it really started back in elementary and kindergarten whenever things first started getting bad with bullying, and that really can be prevented so easily, but yet because there's no real teaching outside of like the special like classes and stuff, kids don't understand it until way later. And then they're like, oh, I'm sorry I treated you that way 5 years out of high school. And it's like, yeah, but that sorry can't take away that pain that you left there. That impact is still going to be there for years to come. They have to get over that trauma, but just because they'll forgive, they don't forget. And that's the hard part that people don't realize is you can forgive all you want, but you really can't forget. And even now I struggle with some of that. There are kids that I look back on and I want so badly just to forget what was said. In high school, I can remember being called Satan's spawn just because I memorized something about someone because I knew their uncle. And I hate that I can't take that back. I wish I hadn't memorized the stuff I did, but I couldn't unmemorize that at the time. It took me years to distract myself to forget what I had memorized.
Yeah, and you shouldn't be left years later wishing that you weren't the way that you were, because that's what makes you beautiful. That's what makes you who you are, and that's nothing to be ashamed of. Like you said earlier, that is a characteristic and a trait that people wish that they had more of, is that ability to memorize and not to have to write things down so much. But we've talked a little bit about the misconceptions of autism, and maybe that is also a breakdown that is apparent and that's visible because there's so many misconceptions and stereotypes about autism, and that leads people to make judgments.
It
So,
does.
right. So what stereotype about autism would you like to clarify or that you feel is important to combat?
A stereotype that I've heard a lot about more recently is just that a lot of people think that when they hear autism, it's just somebody who's more low functioning. So when they see me, they think, oh, you're not autistic. But that's not true. Just because I look or act that way doesn't mean I'm not. I hide it very well anymore because I learned I had to. I had no choice but to because of how I was treated outside of the house. And even in the house, it becomes hard because when I'm at the house, it then all those walls I built outside have to break down in order for me to let all it out. And it just makes it harder at home. And it makes that stereotype makes it so hard to go anywhere. It's where I want to seclude myself and be antisocial because it feels so much easier to not put up those walls. And that just, it really makes it so hard to think that if I wasn't this way, would it be easier? And that makes that stereotype so harmful in so many ways. And it's something nobody should have to deal with. Autism isn't just one-sided. There are many different types of autism. There's many different ways it could go. But people don't realize that because it's not something that's talked about. It's just people automatically assume just because somebody's diagnosed autistic, they're automatically not smart. And even in school, because I was diagnosed with autism, my counselor told me I wasn't smart enough for creative writing. And yet I've gone and written a book and written poems, and that it just appalls me that people can say that, and yet I can do so much on that subject.
Right. And I think that's why Megan and I love what we do as far as promoting different perspectives within the autism community, because there isn't just one. And I love watching a really popular TikToker who is also on the autism spectrum. And what she always says is, if you're only listening to me, you're not really listening. Go listen to other people's stories. And that is so true. And I think sometimes some of these hurtful and harmful comments come out of ignorance because they don't know other perspectives, or they only know what they've seen on TV, or they only know what they've heard. And just you sharing you as a person, regardless of you talking about your autism, can automatically, I think, really shape other people's perspectives and really see you as a human and as a person, and for your talents, which you do have so many talents to be thankful for and will be helpful for your success later on in life. And it's interesting how I think you keep saying, well, you keep mentioning how you wonder if your life would be different without your diagnosis of autism, if your life would be better or if it would be worse. And we will never really know, but the most we can do in this moment is just appreciate what we have and what we can bring to the table, because you, like I said, you have so many skills, and also you as a person are so kind and humble and just have so much to offer the world. So I'm curious to know if you could give any advice to your younger self, what would that be as you're going through some of these memories?
I honestly would tell myself to look up more instead of looking down at the negatives as much. Because at the time, I really did look down at negatives more. I struggled a lot with suicidal thoughts. I struggled with the idea of cutting and all that because of all the tormenting and the bullying. And I really didn't talk with anybody about it. I didn't tell anybody because, as you said, it's a very taboo topic. It's something that's not accepted in society. Even by my own family, it's not really accepted. And so I really kept hushed up about it. And I wish at the time I probably would have talked about it more. I wished I had opened up more about the stuff that I went through in my own mind more. And I think that probably would have helped me probably empower myself more, be able to overcome the stuff that I have now within the past 6 years quicker if I had opened up and had thought more positively then as I do now.
Right. What's beautiful is that you have adopted that mindset more and more. And I'll just say that it is not easy to be positive when negative things are happening to you or happening toward you. So I would never even I would not hold that against you for taking a while to come to a positive mindset, because you still have so much of a journey ahead of you, and to go forward with appreciation of what happened to you because it can help others, because you can talk about how you maintained enough positivity to make it through and to persevere through your struggles. And that's why you are just such a wonderful advocate. And I hope that this conversation has motivated you to share your story with more people, because we have certainly been touched by your story and feel that it can impact so many different people's lives. And you've talked a lot about the hard stuff. And this is what we don't always talk about, you know? We love to see autism from a positive light. We love to talk about the wonderful and great things that people with autism can share with the world, but it's not often that we have the opportunity to talk about the negative stuff too. And that's pretty necessary conversations to have, but yes, they are emotional. And it's not always easy to listen to, but until we have those conversations, we can't make changes in the right directions about those negative concepts and things that are happening. So, since we covered so much ground about your autism journey and what you hope to accomplish as a self advocate, what's one thing that you hope our viewers will remember or take away from our conversation today?
I really hope they take away the idea that you really don't know someone until you walk a day in their shoes, because I really didn't know that the boy that I saved had that struggle until he told me. I had no idea that some of the people that I've helped, even after school, after graduating and all that, I didn't realize I helped them until months down the road or any of that. There is so much you can learn from someone without even realizing you've helped them in a way you never knew, because you just never know what someone else is actually going through under the surface. It's so easy for someone to put on that fake smile, but it's so much harder to see past that fake smile.
And that's why these messages of just generally being kind to one another and empathizing with one another is not only important within the autism community, but just in our everyday lives, because we never know what our coworkers are going through, what our family or friends are going through, but we should always remain kind to them and empathetic and just try to walk in their shoes, like you said. And that is a really great message to leave this episode off on, because I know Megan and I really promote that whenever we go into our communities, and it's the heart of everything that we do. So thank you so much for visiting with us, Rochelle. If you enjoyed this episode, please make sure to find her at her websites at facebook.com/thelunarrosewriters and at facebook.com/chaoslovesfrac, and that is spelled KOAOS loves frac. Thank you, everyone, and we will see you next Sunday. Thank you for listening to Spectrum Sundays. We are your hosts, Miss Thousand Islands, Francesca D'Alessandro,
and Miss Central Pennsylvania, Megan Sinisi. Please make sure to subscribe to our series and follow us on social media to stay connected with autism professionals and self-advocates.
And remember, true impact is accomplished through active listening and exploring the world through a variety of perspectives.
Join us next week on Spectrum Sundays to help cultivate a community of inclusion, appreciation, and acceptance around autism.